And we are back here at the 130th Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus in Anaheim, California. And we are continuing our coverage here. And we are happy to have joining us now Ruben Quezada, who is the author of For Greater Glory, the True Story of the Cristiada. And thank you so much, first of all, Ruben, for being here.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Also a fourth degree knight?
Fourth degree knight as well.
Fourth
Correct.
degree knight as well.
Absolutely.
So let's just get right into it if we could,
Sure.
Ruben, and maybe talk about or set the stage for us, I guess, back into the early 1900s in Mexico, where these laws appeared on the book, and it's sort of, I don't know if it was a sort of like a silent type thing, and then it wasn't until later when a president came along, K.S., who started enacting these laws that had been there, and sort of took, I don't know if it took people by surprise in Mexico or what.
You're correct. When these laws were actually, this new law, the Calles law came into effect, he took articles from the Constitution, which was established in 1917.
Okay.
And they were there, but they were not implemented for the next two terms of the presidents that were there. And when President Calles came in, well, he was raised an atheist, anti-Catholic. So when he came into power, it was a perfect opportunity for him to be able to implement this with such force, his executive power. Plus, one of the things that he oftentimes was disturbed is that the Catholic Church, as he stated many times, kept infiltrating or poisoning the minds of the people. So one of the things he wanted to do to make sure that to eradicate not just the faith but God out of people's minds, because he was, of course, directing the Mexico to be led into a socialist utopia. And that was the first way for him to begin, is to take God out of that, and now he could form his own socialist country in his own way. And of course, the response, when nobody would have ever expected it would have been so strong. Of course, the first ones to decry this was the bishops and the Catholic League. And again, for a few months after this law went into effect, which was on August 1st, a lot of Catholics began to start taking action. And of course, we see one beautiful action that our bishops in Mexico took to protect the community. And what they did is they asked the Vatican for permission, the Holy Father, to suspend all Catholic worship, because the moment the government would forcefully to close the churches, there would be confrontations. To avoid the bloodshed, they asked for permission, and it was granted. So that was the first strong decision that was made to protect the people. But the government, of course, had other intentions. It wasn't just going to go down so quietly. And there were many confrontations in the next few months. But again, I think the most important thing to understand here is that people, when Catholics, and Catholicism was running fervent in Mexico at the time. I'm sure it still does in certain areas, but when you take away the sacraments, you take away the Eucharist, you take away anything like that, the soul can only withstand so much. Now you're talking about 2 weeks, 2 months at a time without a sacrament, without confession, without a mass. And people were getting desperate. So as much as they tried, supported with the Catholic League, to lift this attack, people just knew eventually that there was no other alternative but to raise up in arms. And then we see this uprising that became, from the courage of a few men, grew into this rebellion. Not a rebellion, I would say, it depends where you see it.
Yeah.
They call it the Cristero rebellion. The government sees it as a rebellion because we're being rebellious to their laws. We're seeing it as an uprising to defend our religious liberty. So it just overtook the entire country by storm in a period of 3 years.
We're facing threats, as we all know, to our religious liberty in this country. Recently, Cardinal George made a statement. I'm paraphrasing, but it has stayed with me. He said, I will die in my own bed. My successor will die in prison. His successor will die a martyr's death. And how timely is it that this movie now comes to our attention, the companion guide, when we're faced with threats to our own religious liberty in the United States?
Of course. It is very providential. Every time the topic comes up, how does this relate to us? Well, it very much. It is, I think, an eye-opener for all of us to see that if we don't stand up right now, even for something like this, because I've sensed that a lot of us might be able to. We have this. I think it's the biggest danger is indifference, and that's what we need to understand, that we can't take this lightly. And if we take this lightly, eventually this will happen. And there are the great words, prophetic words that could happen. And for us to be able to not just sit back and not just cross our arms and figure someone else is going to do something about it. Well, we might not be persecuted right now with the same way Mexico was, the Catholics in Mexico were persecuted 86 years ago. But our children might, and our grandchildren might. Mm-hmm. So are we willing to put them through that, or are we going to stand up right now and defend it with all we can? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big responsibility we'll need to take seriously.
And being here at the Knights of Columbus Supreme Convention, it's appropriate to recognize some of the Knights of Columbus that were involved in the Cristiada War, and they're giving of their lives and sacrificing so much to protect their religious liberty in Mexico. And maybe we could speak on that and some of the knights that were involved in this movement.
Of course. There was a total, I believe, 9 Knights of Columbus. There was priests involved and I believe 3 laymen. And you see their stories. There's 2 of them that I've read over and over again, the Huerta brothers, and they were men completely committed to God amidst adversity. And this is where we see all these martyrs. We know very few, of course, through these great celebrations we've seen, whether it be beatifications or canonizations. But there's a long list of waiting because of their sacrifice. And you see, especially I believe, men who are very committed to serving the church and serving God, especially through the Knights of Columbus. You see their stories, and the courage is there, and you're there to do one service, and it's to serve Christ the King. So when you read all these stories of these men who gave their lives, especially these that we call blesseds and saints, I think they're a source of inspiration for all of us, and we should be able to learn from them, because there could come the time when we should follow in their footsteps, and we must be ready.
You do a lot of work yourself and your collaborators. I'm aware of St. Joseph's Media, the Catholic Resource Center,
correct,
and Guadalupe Radio. These are all important ways to give the resources to people so that they can be educated and we can meet the challenge. Could you tell us about some of your work?
Absolutely. Well, we focus, the most important thing is to educate people on their faith, not just on the basics, but also in depth of what we're up against right now. And also, how do we live this? How do we put this to work on our daily lives? Because maybe a lot of us think that's just Catholicism and going to church on Sundays and that's it. It's every single day, the way we live, the way we carry ourselves. And I think one of the biggest threats, and I tell people, even my own Latino community, the biggest threat that the government can see is an educated Catholic person be able to live that, and also to defend it like we are in need right now. And the response that I get is like, well, we need to know more information. We need people, leaders, to show us, because sometimes we don't have the resources. And that's what we try to do, even whether it's on a basic Bible study, to a conference, or through a radio show, to tell them exactly what we're up against. And we know that, again, media has been such a blessing, but to me it's a never-ending commitment, I think, to serve Christ. And I think it is a daily blessing to do this. And I think as long as God keeps us with the doors open and be able to combat whatever's being thrown at us, well, then we got to be there swinging back.
Yeah. And it's important too, as you mentioned, and the situation in Mexico where these laws were on the books, but until they started being enacted is when people started to realize, hey, we have to stand up for this. So it's important to sort of be preemptive in what we're doing, so that that's
absolutely the important thing is knowing that when these laws went into effect and people knew there was no other alternative. Some of the people, because the persecution had already happened, and some of our priests were being persecuted simply for celebrating a mass, because of the atrocities, these horrific things that were happening to our leaders, our clergy. Some people joined the fight, because they weren't all Catholic. See, not all Catholics joined the fight, and not all who joined the fight were Catholics, because they believed in religious freedom. And that, I think it's very important. We see the great character of General Gorostieta. Andy Garcia did an incredible role, but he is a perfect example of what everyone should be doing today.
And you are a great example of what it means to be a knight, a brother, fourth degree knight, of the witness and the work of the Knights of Columbus. And we want to thank you for telling us what you do as a great night.
Well, thank you. It is an honor always to serve Christ and His church. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank
and for those of you who haven't seen the movie, go see it for greater glory, and purchase the book, the companion guide for greater glory, the true story of the Cristiada. And we thank Ruben for being with us today. We're going to be back with more of our coverage of the 130th Supreme Convention after this.